The bright lights of the media station hurt Zefkar's 3 eyes. He sat in the cold metal chair, his blue-gray skin looking pale under the harsh lighting. His left arm was gone, replaced by a shiny metal robot arm that clicked when he moved. The war correspondent across from him, Leora Vex, adjusted her recording device and smiled. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," Leora said. Her voice was calm and professional. "The galaxy wants to know the truth about what happened during the Terran-Vorthan border conflicts." Zefkar's 3 eyes stared at the table. He had not wanted to do this interview. The memories were too painful, but the leaked videos had forced his hand. Everyone in the galaxy had seen the footage now. They had seen what the humans could do. "I was a commander in the Vorthan Imperial forces," Zefkar began, his voice rough and tired. "I fought for 30 years across 12 different star systems. I thought I knew everything about war. Then we met the humans." Leora leaned forward. "Tell us about your first encounter with human forces." Zefkar closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with something that looked like fear. It was on Haven's Rest, a small human colony world with maybe 50,000 people. Our intelligence said they had basic weapons only. Kinetic rifles, some explosives. Nothing that could threaten our forces. We had plasma cannons, battle mechs, a full war fleet in orbit. It should have been easy. He paused and looked at his metal hand. The fingers moved with small mechanical sounds. We landed with 3 battalions. Over 4,000 Vorthan warriors. The humans had maybe 300 defenders. Their leader was someone called Captain Jake Morrison. Before the war, he had been a teacher at a school for children. Leora made notes on her tablet. "What happened when you attacked?" "We sent them a surrender demand first. It is proper military procedure. We told them to lay down their weapons and they would be treated according to Galactic War conventions." Morrison's reply was ... unexpected. Zefkar's voice grew quieter. He said no, just no. Not even an explanation or counteroffer. Then he cut communication. "That seems normal for a military commander," Leora said. "You do not understand," Zefkar replied, shaking his head. "In galactic warfare, when you are outnumbered 10 to 1, you surrender. It is logical. It saves lives. It is what civilized beings do. But humans are not like other beings." The alien veteran stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neutral space station orbited peacefully around Kepler Prime. Ships from dozens of different species moved in orderly patterns. We began our attack at dawn. Standard formation, textbook assault. We expected to control the main settlement within 6 hours. Instead, Morrison and his people did something no military academy teaches. What did they do? They disappeared. Zefkar turned back to face the interviewer. One moment they were in their defensive positions. The next moment, they were gone. But they were not retreating. They were hunting us. Leora looked confused. Hunting? Morrison had split his forces into tiny groups, 2 or 3 humans each. They knew their world better than we did. They used the landscape against us. They set traps. They struck and vanished before we could respond. Zefkar sat back down heavily. "I lost 12 soldiers in the first hour to booby traps. Explosives hidden in doorways, pitfalls covered with branches, mines buried in roads. The humans had turned their entire colony into a weapon." "But surely your superior technology gave you an advantage?" "Technology means nothing when you cannot find your enemy," Zefkar said bitterly. "Our plasma weapons could destroy buildings, but the humans were not in the buildings. Our sensors could detect movement, but the humans moved like ghosts." He leaned forward, his 3 eyes focusing intently on Leora. "Do you know what it is like to fight an enemy who knows they are going to die but keeps fighting anyway?" Leora shook her head. "On the 3rd day, we cornered a group of human defenders in an old mining facility. Sergeant Lisa Park was their leader. She had been a cook in a restaurant before the war. We surrounded the building with 2 full companies. We had them completely trapped. Zefkar's metal fingers drummed against the table. I offered Park the same terms I had offered Morrison. Surrender and live, she laughed. Actually laughed. Then she told me something I will never forget. What did she say? She said humans do not surrender when their families are at stake. She said they would rather die fighting than live as prisoners. Then she cut the communication link. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. The siege lasted 6 days, Zefkar continued. We could not break their defenses. Every time we tried to advance, they pushed us back. Park and her 30 soldiers held off 400 of my best warriors. How is that possible? They fought in shifts. When one human was too tired to continue, another took their place. They shared ammunition, water, food. When their medical supplies ran out, they treated wounds with torn clothing and mud. Zefkar stood up again and began pacing. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they never stopped talking to each other. They told jokes. They sang songs. They talked about their families, their hopes, their dreams. They were terrified, but they never gave up. What finally ended the siege? Park did something that haunts me still, Zefkar said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. On the 6th day, she contacted me directly. She said her people were out of ammunition and water. She said they were ready to make a deal. Leora waited for him to continue. I thought she was finally ready to surrender. I agreed to meet with her under a flag of truce. When I arrived at the meeting point, Park was there alone. She looked so small and fragile compared to my warriors. Zefkar stopped pacing and stared out the window again. She did not want to surrender. She wanted to make a trade. She offered to tell me the locations of all the remaining human defensive positions on Haven's Rest. In exchange, she wanted safe passage for the civilian population to evacuate. That seems reasonable, Leora said. It would have been, if that was all she wanted, Zefkar replied. But Park had one more condition. She wanted to fight me in single combat. If she won, her people went free. If I won, she would give me the information I needed. Did you accept? Zefkar turned back to the interviewer, and for the first time, something like admiration showed in his eyes. I should have said no. The challenge was absurd. Park was barely half my size, injured, exhausted, and armed with primitive weapons. But there was something in her eyes that made me agree. Something I had never seen before in any warrior of any species. What was it? Absolute certainty, Zefkar said quietly. She knew she was going to die, but she also knew she was going to make it count. Leora watched as Zefkar's metal fingers gripped the edge of the table. The alien veteran's 3 eyes looked distant, as if he was seeing something far away and terrible. The fight with Sergeant Park was only the beginning, Zefkar said slowly. After Haven's Rest, my superiors decided I needed a bigger challenge. They sent me to Blackrock Station. He stood up and walked to the water dispenser in the corner of the room. His movements were stiff and careful, like someone who carried old pain in their bones. Blackrock Station controlled the shipping lanes to 3 human star systems, he continued, pouring water into a clear cup. It was built into an asteroid, deep in space. The station was huge. It could house 10,000 people and had enough supplies to last for years. Leora made more notes. What were your orders? Simple. Take the station within 48 hours. My superiors wanted to cut off human supply lines before they could organize a real defense. I had 5,000 elite warriors and the best equipment. In the Vorthan fleet. Zefkar returned to his seat, but did not sit down. Instead, he stood behind the chair, using it like a shield between himself and the interviewer. The station was defended by Colonel Danny Wright and about 800 humans. Before the war, Wright had been an engineer who built bridges and roads. Most of his soldiers were not even real soldiers. They were workers, technicians, cooks, clerks, people who had never held a weapon before the fighting started. "That must have made your job easier," Leora said. "That is what I thought too," Zethkar replied, his voice growing darker. "I was wrong, very wrong." He began pacing again, his metal arm clicking with each step. "We attacked the outer defenses at 0600 hours. Standard assault formation. Our plasma cannons tore through their barriers like paper. Our battle mechs smashed their defensive walls. Everything went exactly as planned." Zethkar stopped pacing and looked directly at Leora. "For exactly 27 minutes. Then the humans did something that changed everything." "What did they do?" "They started running away. At first, I thought we had broken their will to fight. My warriors cheered as the humans retreated deeper into the station. We followed them, thinking victory was close." The alien's three eyes narrowed, as if remembering something painful. But it was not retreat. It was something else. Something worse. Leora leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The humans were not running from us. They were leading us. Every corridor they abandoned, every room they left behind, became a trap. Colonel Wright and his people had turned their own home into a weapon." Zethkar sat down heavily, his metal arm resting on the table with a soft thud. Engineer Ben Clark was Wright's second in command. Before the war, he had designed children's playgrounds. During the siege, he became something different. He had rigged every section of the station with explosives. They were going to destroy their own base? Not destroy, control. Clark and his team had planned everything perfectly. As we advanced, they would detonate charges behind us. They cut off our escape routes while drawing us deeper into the station. The room's lights flickered slightly, casting strange shadows across Zethkar's face. By the end of the first day, we controlled 60% of the station, but we were trapped. The humans had sealed us inside their maze. Every door could be locked. Every corridor could be flooded with poison gas. Every room could become our tomb. Leora's stylus paused over her tablet. "How did your soldiers react?" "Fear. For the first time in my career, I saw fear in the eyes of veteran Vorthan warriors. These were soldiers who had fought across the galaxy. They had faced the Krillian Hive, the Nexari battle clans, the Thorian war beasts. But they had never faced anything like this." Zethkar's voice became quieter, more strained. "The humans were not just fighting us. They were hunting us. In the dark corridors of their own station, they moved like spirits. They knew every hiding place, every secret passage, every weak point in their own defenses. But surely your technology gave you some advantage?" "Technology means nothing when the enemy controls the battlefield," Zethkar said bitterly. "Our sensors showed us where the humans were, but they also showed us moving toward traps. Our weapons could blast through walls, but the humans had planned for that too." He stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, a small transport ship was docking with the station. On the second day, we lost 3 full squads to a single human soldier. Private Amy Foster had been a librarian before the war. She was small, quiet, and looked like she could not hurt anyone. What did she do? Foster was alone in the station's central computer core. We thought she was trying to call for help or send a distress signal. Instead, she was setting a trap that would kill 30 of my best warriors. Zethkar's reflection in the window looked old and tired. Foster had rigged the computer core to explode when we entered, but she did not just set a timer. She waited. She stayed at her post, knowing she was going to die, and waited for the perfect moment to trigger the charges. "She killed herself to stop you." "She killed herself to slow us down for 15 minutes, Zethkar corrected. "That is what made it so terrible. The humans were not making grand gestures or heroic stands. They were making small sacrifices that added up to something much bigger. The alien veteran returned to his seat, his movements slow and careful. The worst part came on the third day. We had cornered a group of human defenders in the communication center. Their leader was Kate Adams, a young woman who had been a teacher before the war. Leora waited for him to continue. Adams could have evacuated with the rest of her team. We had given them multiple chances to surrender, but she stayed at her communication station, coordinating the defense even as we broke through their barriers. Zethkar. Metal fingers drummed against the table again. I watched through our battle cameras as plasma fire melted the walls around her. Adams was burned, bleeding, barely able to stand. But she never left her post. She kept talking to her people, giving them orders, coordinating their attacks. What happened to her? Adams used her final transmission to guide a precision strike against the station's main reactor. Zethkar said quietly. She stayed in the communications center until the very last second, making sure the attack hit its target. When the reactor exploded, it took out an entire battalion of my warriors. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. That was when I realized the truth about human warfare, Zethkar continued. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make us pay the highest possible price for victory. Every human life we took cost us 3 or 4 Vorthan lives. But you did capture the station eventually? Yes, Zethkar said, his voice hollow. After 5 days of fighting, we controlled Blackrock Station, but it was a hollow victory. We had lost over 2,000 warriors. The station was so damaged it was useless, and the humans had evacuated most of their important supplies before we even arrived. He looked at Leora with something like desperation in his 3 eyes. Do you understand what I am trying to tell you? The humans had planned to lose from the very beginning. They never intended to hold the station. They only wanted to make us bleed for it. But why? Because they knew something we did not understand then, Zethkar said. They knew that if they could make every victory cost us more than we could afford, eventually we would have to stop fighting. The alien veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper. And they were willing to die to prove that point. Zethkar's hands shook as he reached for his water cup. The liquid spilled slightly as he brought it to his lips. Leora noticed that his metal arm was making small whirring sounds, as if the machinery inside was working harder than normal. After Blackrock Station, I thought I understood human warfare, Zethkar said, setting the cup down carefully. I thought they were just willing to die for their cause. Many species do that. But I was wrong again. What happened on Dust Bowl 7 showed me the real horror of fighting humans. The alien veteran stood up and walked to the far corner of the room. He pressed his face against the cool metal wall, as if trying to draw strength from it. Dust Bowl 7 was a small moon with nothing on it except rocks and dust. No cities, no resources, nothing worth fighting for. But the remnants of the human 7th Infantry Division had taken shelter there after we destroyed their main base. How many humans were there? Leora asked. Maybe 300 soldiers left out of an original force of 5,000. They were trapped, cut off from any supply ships, with no hope of rescue. My regiment had them surrounded completely. We outnumbered them 10 to 1. Zethkar turned back toward the interviewer, but kept his distance. Their commander was Rick Stone. Before the war, he had been a farmer who grew food for his local community. He was not a career soldier or a military genius, just an ordinary man who had been pushed into an impossible situation. What did Stone do? He requested a ceasefire for negotiations. This was normal military procedure, so I agreed. I expected him to offer surrender terms. Instead, Stone made a proposal that violated every rule of civilized warfare. The aliens. 3 eyes focused on something far beyond the walls of the interview room. Stone proposed single combat. 1 human warrior against 1 Vorthan warrior. If we won, All remaining humans would surrender without conditions. If they won, we would allow their civilian evacuation ships safe passage through our blockade. Leora looked confused. But there were no civilian ships, were there? That is exactly what I told Stone, Zethkar replied. The proposal made no sense. Even if his champion won, it would not change the military situation. The humans were still trapped and outnumbered. So why did you agree? Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I wanted to understand them. After months of fighting humans, I still did not know why they kept fighting when logic said they should surrender. I thought maybe this duel would give me answers. The alien walked back to his chair but did not sit down. Instead, he gripped the back of it with both hands. I chose my best warrior for the combat. Sub-Commander Vexthan had never lost a duel in 20 years of service. He was bigger, stronger, and faster than any human. He had advanced plasma weapons and battle armor that could stop almost any attack. Who did the humans choose? Staff Sergeant Grace Miller, Zethkar said, and something like respect entered his voice. Before the war, Miller had been a teacher at a school for young children. She was small, quiet, and looked like she should be reading stories to students. Not fighting aliens, Leora made notes on her tablet. That seems like an unfair match. It was completely unfair, Zethkar agreed. Miller had basic human kinetic weapons against Vorthan plasma technology. She had no armor against Vexthan's battlesuit. She was half his size and had no military training before the war started. But she accepted the challenge anyway, not just accepted. When Stone announced that Miller would be their champion, she smiled. Actually smiled, as if she was looking forward to it. Zethkar began pacing again, his metal arm clicking with each step. The duel was set for dawn the next day. I spent the night reviewing Vexthan's battle plans and checking his equipment. Everything was perfect. Victory was certain. What happened? When the fighting started. For the first 10 minutes, everything went as expected. Vexthan's plasma rifle tore through Miller's cover. His battle armor deflected her bullets. He was faster, stronger, and better equipped. Miller was clearly losing. The alien stopped pacing and stared at Leora with wide eyes, but Miller did not stop fighting. Even when Vexthan's plasma fire burned her arm, she kept shooting. Even when his battlesuit's charge knocked her down, she got back up. Even when her rifle jammed and her sidearm ran out of ammunition, she drew a knife. A knife against plasma weapons? Miller charged straight at Vexthan with nothing but a metal blade. She took 3 direct plasma hits during her charge. Any normal being would have been dead twice over. But Miller kept moving. Zethkar's voice grew strained, as if the memory was physically painful. She reached Vexthan and began stabbing at the joints in his armor. Her knife broke against the metal, but she kept trying to use the broken hilt. Vexthan was so shocked by her actions that he hesitated for just a moment. What did Miller do? She tackled him. This small human teacher wrapped her arms around a fully armored Vorthan warrior and threw herself backward off the cliff they had been fighting on. The room was completely silent. Even the station's background hum seemed to fade away. Both fighters fell 300 meters onto the rocks. Below, Zethkar continued. Vexthan's armor should have protected him from the fall. But Miller had damaged the joints during her knife attack. When they hit the ground, his suit failed. They both died? Yes, but that is not the important part, Zethkar said, his voice growing urgent. The important part is what Miller was thinking during those final moments. Leora waited for him to explain. Our battle cameras recorded everything. As Miller and Vexthan fell, our audio picked up what she was saying. She was not screaming or cursing or calling for help. What was she saying? She was talking to her students, Zethkar whispered. Miller was remembering the children she used to teach. She was telling them she was sorry she could not come back to read them more stories. The alien veteran's metal arm began to shake uncontrollably. Do you understand what that means? Miller was not fighting out of hatred or anger or military duty. She was fighting out of love. Love for people she would never see again. But the duel result was a draw. What happened to the surrender agreement? I honored Stone's terms, Zethkar said. Miller had not won, but she had not lost either. I allowed the civilian evacuation ships to pass through our blockade. Leora looked confused again. But you said there were no civilian ships. There were not. But 12 hours after the duel, 3 human transport ships arrived at Dust Bowl. 7. Somehow Stone had arranged for rescue ships to arrive exactly when they were needed. Zethkar sat down heavily in his chair. That was when I realized the truth about the duel. Stone never expected Miller to win. He was buying time. The single combat was just a delay tactic to keep us from attacking until the rescue ships arrived. So, the humans had planned this all along? Yes, but that is still not the most important part, Zethkar said, his 3 eyes focusing directly on Leora. The most important part is that Miller knew. She knew the duel was just a distraction. She knew she was going to die for 12 hours of time. And she fought anyway? She fought anyway. Miller died so that 300 soldiers she barely knew could live another day. She gave her life for 12 hours that might not even matter. In the bigger war, Zethkar's metal fingers drummed against the table one final time. That is when I understood what we were really fighting. Not just human soldiers or human weapons or human tactics. We were fighting the idea that some things are worth dying for, even when dying accomplishes nothing except giving other people a little more time. The alien veteran looked out the window at the peaceful space around Kepler Prime. And that idea, once you encounter it, changes you forever. Zethkar sat in his chair for a long time without speaking. His 3 eyes stared at the table, and his metal arm had stopped its constant clicking. The silence stretched until Leora began to wonder if the interview was over. After Dust Bowl. 7. I could not sleep, Zethkar finally said. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grace Miller falling from that cliff. I kept hearing her voice talking to children who were not there. He looked up at Leora, and she saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. It was not fear or anger or sadness. It was something deeper and more troubling. I requested a transfer to intelligence analysis. I told my superiors that I needed to understand human psychology to fight them more effectively, but that was a lie. What was the real reason? I needed to understand why Miller had smiled before the duel. I needed to know how ordinary people could become something that terrified veteran warriors across the galaxy. Zethkar stood up and walked to the water dispenser again. This time, he filled 2 cups and offered one to Leora. I spent months reading human psychological profiles, cultural reports, and captured documents. What I found was not what I expected. What did you discover? Humans are not natural warriors, Zethkar said, returning to his seat. They are not like the Krillian hive, which is bred for battle. They are not like the Nexari clans, which live by honor codes. They are not even like us Vorthans, who follow military tradition. He took a sip of water and continued. Jake Morrison, the teacher who became a defender of Haven's Rest, had never fired a weapon before the war. His hobby was growing flowers. In his garden, Lisa Park, who held the mining facility for 6 days, spent her free time cooking for her neighbors. Danny Wright, who turned Black Rock Station into a fortress, designed playgrounds where children could play safely. But they became effective soldiers. They became something more than soldiers, Zethkar corrected. They became something that no military academy in the galaxy teaches. They became people who could adapt to anything. The alien veteran's voice grew more intense. Do you know what adaptation really means? It means changing yourself so completely that you become unrecognizable. Most species adapt slowly, over generations. But humans can adapt in days, hours, even minutes when they need to. Leora made more notes. Can you give me an example? Ben Clark, the engineer who rigged Blackrock Station with explosives. Before the war, he designed safe playgrounds for children. His job was to make sure no one got hurt. During the war, he became an expert at killing people with hidden bombs. Zethkar's 3 eyes narrowed, but here's the important part. Clark did not enjoy his new role. He cried every night, according to captured diary entries. He hated what he had become, but he kept doing it because his people needed him to. That sounds like normal wartime psychology. No, Zethkar said firmly. Normal wartime psychology involves training, conditioning, and gradual change. Humans skip all of that. They can become completely different people overnight if the situation demands it. He stood up and began pacing again. Amy Foster went from being a quiet librarian to a saboteur who killed 30 soldiers with one trap. Kate Adams went from teaching children to coordinating military strikes. Grace Miller went from reading bedtime stories to fighting duels with alien warriors. But they were still the same people inside, right? That is what makes them so dangerous, Zethkar replied. They were exactly the same people inside. Foster was still quiet and thoughtful when she set her traps. Adams was still patient and caring when she coordinated attacks. Miller was still gentle and kind when she charged with a broken knife. Leora looked confused. I do not understand. Humans do not become monsters when they fight. They remain human. They keep their emotions, their values, their connections to other people. But they also become capable of absolutely anything when those things are threatened. Zethkar stopped pacing and faced the interviewer directly. Every other species in the galaxy has limits. The Krillian hive fights until their queen orders them to stop. The Nexuri clans fight until their honor is satisfied. We Vorthans fight until military objectives are achieved. What about humans? Humans fight until they cannot fight anymore. And then they find ways to keep fighting anyway. The alien's voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. I analyzed thousands of human combat records. Do you know what I found? Human soldiers get stronger as battles get more desperate. The worse their situation becomes, the more creative and dangerous they become. That does not sound possible. I thought so too, but the evidence was overwhelming. Human units that were cut off from supply lines became more effective, not less. Human soldiers who were wounded fought harder than healthy ones. Human commanders who were outnumbered made better tactical decisions. Zethkar returned to his seat and leaned forward. It is as if humans have been designed by evolution to thrive in impossible situations. Other species break under extreme pressure. Humans transform. What did your superiors say when you reported this? They classified my reports and ordered me to stop the research, Zethkar said bitterly. They said my conclusions were too dangerous to share with other species in the galaxy. Dangerous how? Because if other species knew the truth about human adaptability, they would never challenge humanity again. Or worse, they would try to destroy all humans before they could adapt to become something even more dangerous. Leora set down her stylus. What do you think humans could become? Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was filled with something that might have been awe. I think humans are still evolving. Every challenge they face, every war they fight, every impossible situation they survive, makes them stronger. They are not just a species. They are a process. A process? A process of becoming whatever they need to become to survive. Right now they are farmers and teachers and engineers who have learned to fight. But if the galaxy pushes them harder, they might become something else entirely. The alien veteran stood up and walked to the window one final time. The border conflicts ended 3 years ago. Since then, humans have been building new ships, training new soldiers, and developing new technologies. But they have also been doing something else. What? They have been remembering. Every battle, every sacrifice, every lesson learned is being passed down to the next generation. Human children are learning about Grace Miller and Kate Adams, and all the others who died fighting us. Zefkar turned back to Leora with fear in his three eyes. Do you understand what that means? We taught them how to fight us. We showed them our weaknesses, our tactics, our psychology. And they are teaching their children everything we taught them. But the war is over. The war with the Vorthans is over, Zefkar corrected, but other species are watching. The Thorian Empire is expanding toward human space. The Nexuri clans are looking for new conquest opportunities. The Krillian hive is always seeking new worlds to absorb. What do you think will happen? I think humanity's greatest test is coming. And I think the galaxy is not prepared for what humans will become when they are truly threatened. Zefkar sat down heavily in his chair. I resigned from the military after submitting my final report. I could not be part of any future wars against humanity. Not because I am a coward, but because I am afraid of what we might force them to become. What was in your final report? A warning, Zefkar said simply. A warning that humans are not just another species to be conquered or controlled. They are evolution itself, compressed into a single generation. And if the galaxy tries to destroy them, they will adapt to survive in ways we cannot imagine. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the space station. Red lights flashed in the corridors outside the interview room. Leora's communication device buzzed with urgent messages. What is happening? She asked, checking her device. Emergency broadcast from the Galactic Defense Network, she read aloud. Massive alien fleet detected at the edge of human space. Species unknown. Estimated strength, over 10,000 warships. Zefkar's three eyes widened. The Devourers. Who are the Devourers? A species that enslaves entire civilizations. They consume worlds, absorb populations, and move on to the next target. They have been expanding across the outer galaxy for decades. Leora stood up, her interview forgotten. How long until they reach human space? Days, maybe hours, Zefkar replied. The Devourers do not negotiate. They do not take prisoners. They either enslave you or destroy you completely. What will the humans do? Zefkar looked out at the stars, where distant ships were already changing course toward human territory. They will adapt, he said quietly. They will become whatever they need to become to survive. And the galaxy will finally see what humans are truly capable of when they have no choice but to win. The interview room fell silent, except for the continuing alarms. Somewhere in the distance, humanity was about to face its greatest challenge. And somewhere else, the galaxy was about to learn what it really meant to fight an adaptive species. The real war, Zefkar whispered, is about to begin.